It is exactly 3:14 in the morning on June 19, 1963. The fog rolling off the San Francisco Bay is a thick, suffocating gray, heavy enough to swallow a man whole if he isn't careful. But for Ellsworth Raymond Johnson, the man the world knows as Bumpy, this damp, salty air is the sweetest thing he has tasted in over a decade. He stands at the edge of the water, a single weathered suitcase in his hand, and 10 years of silence locked behind his teeth. Behind him, the jagged silhouette of Alcatraz sits like a tombstone in the dark. They call it the Rock, a place designed to break the spirit of the most unbreakable men. Most people who leave that island are either carried out in a pine box or leave with their minds shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. But as Bumpy steps into the shadows of the mainland, he isn't broken. He is refined. 3,650 days. That is how long he has been gone. In that time, the world has moved on, the music has changed, and a new generation of predators has claimed the concrete of Upper Manhattan as their own. While Bumpy was staring at the grey walls of a cell, sharpening his mind like a straight razor, his empire was being dismantled and sold for parts. He knows every name, every face, and every cent that was stolen from the people he swore to protect. He isn't coming back for his chair. He's coming back for the soul of the city. Because while Bumpy was away, Harlem stopped being a neighborhood and started being a carcass. And the man holding the carving knife is someone Bumpy once called a friend. At this very moment, 3,000 miles away on the corner of 125th and Lenox, the neon lights of a jazz club flicker with a predatory glow. Inside, a man named Sterling Silky Vance is holding court. Silky is sipping a 20-year-old scotch that costs more than most families in Harlem make in a month. He is laughing, leaning back in a booth upholstered in Italian leather, telling a joke to a circle of sycophants who hang on his every word because they're terrified of what happens if they don't. Silky bought this club with blood money. He bought his suits with the proceeds of a heroin trade that is currently rotting the very streets Bumpy once kept clean. To Silky, Bumpy Johnson is a ghost story, a legend told to scare rookies, a relic of a bygone era that has no place in the high-speed, high-greed world of 1963. Silky made a fatal calculation when the feds came knocking in 1952. He believed the Rock would swallow Bumpy whole. He believed that 10 years would turn a king into a memory. He is about to learn that in the underworld, silence is a commodity, but betrayal is a debt that gathers interest every single day. You have to understand the Harlem Bumpy left behind versus the one he is returning to. In the early 50s, there was a code. It wasn't a clean business, but there was an order to the chaos. Bumpy was the arbiter, the man who read Shakespeare in the afternoon and played high-stakes chess in his head while walking the blocks. He was the one who made sure the heat stayed on in the winter, and the local preachers had what they needed for their congregations. He was a dictator, yes, but he was a benevolent one. Silky Vance is the opposite. He represents the new era, flashy, greedy, and completely devoid of a moral compass. When Bumpy was sent away, Silky didn't just step into the vacuum, he poisoned it. He invited the Italian families to take a bigger slice of the pie. He flooded the street with cheap, dirty product, and he used fear where Bumpy used respect. The central mystery that keeps the old-timers in the barbershops whispering to this day isn't how Bumpy regained his territory. It's how he managed to dismantle a multi-million-dollar empire in less than 72 hours without pulling a single trigger himself. Everyone remembers the street wars of the 30s, the loud bangs and the screaming tires. But the history books completely missed the silent coup of 1963. This was an invisible chess match played in the back rooms of soul food joints and the quiet corners of public parks. Silky Vance had everything. He had the local precinct in his pocket. He had the Genovese family on his speed dial, and he had a small army of shooters who were paid very well to make people disappear. Bumpy Johnson had a bus ticket and a reputation. On paper, it was a slaughter. In reality, it was a masterclass in psychological warfare. As the sun begins to rise over the Atlantic, Bumpy is already on a Greyhound bus heading east. He sits by the window, his eyes focused on a point miles ahead. He doesn't look like a mob boss. He looks like a grandfather coming home from a long trip. But inside his mind, the board is already set. He knows that his first hour back in Harlem will be his most dangerous. If he hides, he looks weak. If he attacks, he looks desperate. He needs a third option, something that reflects the man he became on the rock. Between these two men stands a pivot point named Detective Miller. Miller has been on the Harlem beat for 20 years. He's a man who has seen the transition from Bumpy's order to Silky's chaos, and he has the bank account to prove he's been looking the other way for a long time. Miller is the human barometer of the tension. When he hears the news that Bumpy's parole has been processed, he doesn't celebrate. He goes to his locker, checks his service revolver, and starts looking for an exit strategy. He knows that the peace treaty in Harlem is officially void. He knows that when a man like Bumpy is betrayed, he doesn't just want his money back. He wants to erase the man who crossed him from the face of the earth. The bus pulls into Port Authority in the middle of a sweltering afternoon. The air in New York is thick with the smell of diesel and ambition. Bumpy steps off the bus and doesn't call a car. He doesn't go to a safe house, he walks. He walks through the crowds, his suitcase in hand, and he takes the subway uptown. He gets off at 125th Street and walks straight into the heart of the kingdom Silky Vance thinks he owns. He doesn't go to a dark alley. He walks into a crowded diner, a place where everyone knows everyone, and he sits down at a table right by the front window. He orders a cup of black coffee, no sugar, no cream. He sits there perfectly still, visible to every person walking by on the sidewalk. This is the first move on the board, a public declaration. He isn't hiding in the shadows, he is the shadow. Within 15 minutes, the whispers start. By 30 minutes, the phones are ringing in the back rooms of every club in the city. The word spreads like a wildfire through a dry forest. The king is back. When the news reaches Silky Vance, he's in the middle of a haircut. He laughs at first, a loud, forced sound that doesn't quite reach his eyes. He tells his guards to go down to the diner and handle it. He expects a shootout. He expects a mess. He sends 3 of his best hitters, men who have killed for far less than a seat at a table. But when they arrive at the diner, they find the seat empty. Bumpy is gone. The only thing left on the table, next to a half-finished cup of cold coffee, is a single silver chess piece. It's the king. This is the icon that will haunt Silky Vance for the next 48 hours. It's not a threat he can shoot at. It's a psychological haunting. Everywhere Silky goes, the Silver King follows. It shows up in his locked car. It shows up on his pillow in a room guarded by 4 men. It shows up inside his private safe. Bumpy isn't just back in Harlem. He's inside Silky's head. And as the sun begins to set on that first day, the realization starts to sink in for everyone in the neighborhood. Silky Vance has the guns, the money, and the power. But Bumpy Johnson has the one thing you can't buy, and you certainly can't steal. He has the initiative. The war hasn't even started yet, and Silky is already losing his mind. By the second morning of Bumpy Johnson's return, the atmosphere in Harlem has shifted from curiosity to a heavy electric dread. It's the kind of silence that precedes a hurricane. Silky Vance is no longer laughing. He is huddled in the back of his club, the air conditioning humming a low, mocking tune against the heat of the June sun. He has tripled his security, surrounding himself with men who carry submachine guns under their trench coats. But he feels more vulnerable than he did when he was a nobody on the corner. The reason is simple. Every time he turns around, that Silver King chess piece appears. It was on his breakfast tray. It was taped to the inside of his medicine cabinet. It was even sitting on the dashboard of his armored Cadillac. Silky is screaming at his men, demanding to know who the traitor is, but that is exactly what Bumpy wants. He is making Silky dismantle his own house from the inside out. While Silky is busy firing his most loyal guards out of a paranoid fever, Bumpy is moving through the neighborhood like a phantom. He isn't visiting the gambling dens or the drug warehouses. He's visiting the people who actually make Harlem breathe. He stops by a small tenement on 116th Street to visit the mother of one of Silky's top shooters, a man named Tommy the Blade. Bumpy doesn't bring a gun. He brings a box of high-end pastries and sits in the kitchen, talking about the old days when the neighborhood was safe enough to leave your front door unlocked. When Tommy comes home and finds the legendary Bumpy Johnson drinking tea with his mother, the young hitman freezes. He realizes in a heartbeat that Bumpy knows where his family lives, where his heart is, and exactly how much he's been paid to switch sides. Bumpy doesn't threaten him. He simply tells him that a man who forgets where he came from is a man who has already lost his way. By noon, Tommy has disappeared, taking half of Silky's protection detail with him. This is the invisible chess match that the history books never recorded. Bumpy isn't fighting a war of attrition. He's performing a social extraction. He spends the afternoon at a quiet barber shop, not getting a haircut, but meeting with the deacons and the preachers. He reminds them of who kept the winter heat running in the churches during the Great Depression. He reminds them of who paid for the local kids to go to trade school when the city turned its back. He isn't asking for a favor. He's reclaiming a debt of loyalty that Silky Vance never bothered to earn. By the time the sun begins to dip below the skyline on the second day, Silky's empire isn't being raided. It's simply evaporating. The informants stop calling. The lookouts on the corners go home. The very streets seem to pull away from Silky, leaving him isolated in his neon-lit fortress. But the final move requires a different kind of leverage. Bumpy knows that Silky only stays afloat because of his partnership with the Genovese family. In a dimly lit basement in Little Italy, Bumpy meets with the Italian capos. He doesn't come with a plea for peace. He comes with a ledger, a leather-bound book he spent years compiling from information he gathered inside Alcatraz. The book contains proof in meticulous detail that Silky Vance has been skimming off the top of every heroin shipment for the last 3 years. Silky wasn't just taking Bumpy's chair, he was stealing from the very people he claimed to serve. The Italians value one thing above all else: the reliability of the bottom line. Bumpy offers them a return to the old ways: stability, silence, and a partner who knows how to keep his hands out of their pockets. He doesn't ask them to kill Silky. He just asks them to step back and watch. The climax of this 72-hour coup arrives on the night of the annual Harlem Moonlight Ball. This is the most prestigious social event of the year, held at the Renaissance Ballroom. It's where the elite of the neighborhood gather: the doctors, the business owners, the musicians, and the power brokers. Silky Vance arrives in a custom-tailored white tuxedo, flanked by his remaining 3 guards. He is desperate to project power, to show the world that he is still the king of Harlem. He walks into the ballroom expecting the music to swell and the crowd to part. But as he enters, the band stops mid-measure. The room falls into a silence so profound you can hear the ice melting in the cocktail glasses. Bumpy Johnson is already there. He is standing at the head of the main table, dressed in a simple, perfectly pressed black suit. He looks like a statesman, a man who belongs at the head of the table. He isn't holding a weapon, he is holding a glass of water. Around him sit the very people Silky thought he owned: the politicians he bribed, the captains of industry he intimidated, and the community leaders he ignored. They aren't looking at Silky with fear anymore. They are looking at him with pity. Bumpy pulls out the chair next to him and gestures for Silky to sit. It's an invitation that carries the weight of a death sentence. In front of the entire Harlem elite, Bumpy doesn't raise his voice. He speaks in a calm, melodic tone that carries to the back of the room. He lays out the evidence of Silky's betrayal, not just the betrayal of Bumpy, but the betrayal of Harlem itself. He talks about the dirty product on the streets, the broken promises, and the greed that replaced the code. He tells Silky that he has 1 hour. 1 hour to gather whatever he can carry and leave the city forever. No assets, no protection, and no name. If he's still within the city limits by midnight, he becomes a ghost. Silky looks around the room, his eyes darting from face to face, searching for a single ally. He looks at his guards, but they have already stepped away, melting into the shadows of the ballroom. He looks at the Italians in the corner, but they are focused on their drinks, having already written him out of their books. Silky Vance, the man who thought he had outrun the shadow of a legend, realizes that he is standing alone in a room full of people who have already forgotten he exists. The social execution is total. He turns and walks out of the ballroom, the sound of his own footsteps echoing in the silence. He doesn't leave with a bang, he leaves with a whimper, a man stripped of everything but his skin. By the time the sun rises on the 3rd day, the order has been restored. The Genovese family formally recognizes Bumpy as the sole arbiter of the territory. The rogue shooters are integrated back into the old system, or they vanish into the night. The tax on local businesses is lowered, and for the first time in a decade, the people of Harlem feel like they have a protector again. History records that Bumpy Johnson's return marked the last great era of the independent Harlem kingpins. It was a time when respect was the only armor that didn't rust, and a man's word was his bond. The moral of the story is that power isn't built on what you take by force, it's built on what you are willing to protect. Silky Vance thought he was safe because he had the money and the guns, but he forgot that a crown is just a piece of metal, if the people don't believe in the head that wears it. Bumpy Johnson didn't just reclaim a neighborhood, he reminded the world that while you can outrun the law, you can never outrun the shadow of the man who gave you your start. In the streets of Harlem, Bumpy didn't just bring peace. He brought a reminder that the king doesn't need to scream to be heard. He just needs to be the last man standing at the table. If this story of absolute strategy and the return of a legend gripped you, make sure to hit that like button. It helps us keep the lights on and the stories flowing. What are you waiting for? Hit that subscribe button and join our inner circle of those who know the history the books won't tell you. Now, I have a question for you. If you were in Bumpy's shoes, would you have let Silky walk away, or would you have finished him right there in the ballroom? Let us know in the comments. Loyalty or justice, which one matters more to you? Share this video with someone who thinks they've seen it all, and get ready for our next episode. The next story is even more insane, involving a betrayal that reached all the way to the halls of power in Washington. You won't want to miss it. Turn on those notifications so you're the first to know when the board is set for the next match. Until then, remember, in this game, the loudest man in the room is usually the weakest. See you in the next one.